Somewhere inside your investment account, one quiet number is waiting unremarkable enough that most people scroll past it, yet at 45, this single figure can be the exact point where decades
of forced savings switch off.
Under one widely used model, roughly $388,000 sitting in an account at 40, 5 can grow, untouched, into close to $1.5 million by 65, enough
to fund $60,000 of yearly retirement spending.
The model leans on a 4% starting withdrawal and a 7% real growth rate, meaning inflation is already stripped out, with the money left fully invested for 2 decades without a
single withdrawal. Cross that line, and inside this scenario, future retirement deposits can fall to nothing. People call this the coastline, but here's what the headline skips. Reaching it does not hand you permission to quit tomorrow morning.
It won't cover this month's rent, your health premium, your groceries, or a single tax bill.
It means the distant obligation, decades away, may already be quietly funded, even though most of that money hasn't landed yet.
So where does $388,000 come from? Work it backward.
$60,000 a year, priced in today's money, divided by a 4% withdrawal rate, gives a finish line of $1.5 million.
That withdrawal figure is a planning assumption borrowed from research, not a fixed law. We'll pressure test it shortly.
$1 compounding at 7% above inflation for 20 years becomes roughly $387 of buying power.
Divide the one and $500,000 target by that multiplier, and you land near $388,000, no further contributions required, because compounding alone supplies the missing
$1.1 million. Real portfolios never grow in a straight line, but the equation exposes the engine underneath. Time is carrying more of this retirement than your paycheck ever will.
Isn't it strange that stopping isn't really the headline here?
Contributing $25,000 a year between 45 and 65, crossing this line makes $500,000 of future deposits optional before growth on them is even counted.
You could keep contributing, but the job every new dollar was doing has quietly changed. The same destination produces wildly different thresholds depending only on age, because every year that passes steals compounding time.
Push the start back to 25. 40 years remain, $1 becomes almost 15, and the coast figure drops to roughly 100,000, just 6.7% of the eventual
target. The rest is manufactured by 4 decades of growth. Nobody earned that missing $1.4 million through a paycheck, capital already invested to the labor.
Compounding doesn't care why years disappeared, low pay, debt, illness, or an expensive mistake. It runs the same cold arithmetic regardless.
At 35 years remain, and the threshold climbs to about 140,000. 5 years alone added $40,000.
The destination never moved, only time vanished.
At 35, the number reaches close to 197,000, nearly double the 25-year-old's figure because a full decade of compounding evaporated.
Subscribing genuinely helps this channel keep producing research built on real numbers instead of motivational fluff. Thank you to everyone who already has.
That jump is the pattern underneath this entire ladder. At 7%, money roughly doubles every 10 years in real terms.
Lose a decade, and today's required portfolio nearly doubles too.
At 40, with 25 years left, the threshold sits near 276,000. Real runway remains, but the curve is steepening.
Back to 45, roughly 388,000, about a quarter of the eventual target.
Compounding still does nearly 3/4 of the work, but with only 20 years left instead of 40, which is why the number feels deceptively small and unsettlingly large at once.
It's nowhere close to $1.5 million, yet almost 4 times the 25-year-old's requirement.
At 50, 15 years remain, and the figure rises to about 544,000, over a third of the final target already needed.
By 55, only 10 years remain, and the threshold jumps to roughly 762,000, past the halfway mark.
Compounding can still nearly double the account, but can no longer conjure most of the goal from a small base.
This isn't a verdict on discipline. The equation only measures time remaining. A later start might mean extra contributions, a shifted date, or trimmed spending. It doesn't mean failure.
At 65 years left, the number climbs near 1.07 million, over 70% of the target already needed.
Coasting starts to resemble ordinary retirement funding because compounding is running out of road.
Here's the whole ladder in one breath. About 100,000 at 25, 140,000 at 30, 190, 7,000 at 35, 270,
6,000 at 40, 380, 8,000 at 45, 540, 4,000 at 50, 760, 2,000 at 55, and just past 1 million at 60.
Every last decade roughly doubles the required starting capital when the destination and growth rate stay fixed.
That's exactly why comparing your number with someone a decade younger is financially meaningless. Their lower bar usually just means they bought more time.
Would it surprise you that your salary barely matters here? The destination exists purely because we picked 60,000 of annual spending. Spending is the engine, not your paycheck.
Earn 200,000 but plan to spend 60, and the portfolio was never built to replace 200,000. Trimming planned spending from 60,000 to 50 drags the target from 1.5 million to 1.25 million. The coast figure falls to about 320.
3,000 push spending to 70,000 instead, and today's threshold climbs to around 450, 2,000.
A 20,000 swing in yearly spending moves today's number by roughly 129,000.
Track real expenses rather than arguing over a generic income replacement percentage. Your mortgage might vanish, health care might climb, and withdrawal taxes never disappear, so they belong inside. The spending figure from the start. The retirement date is the next lever.
Leaving at 60 gives 15 years and pushes the threshold to about 540, 4,000. The familiar 20-year window at 65 returns 380, 8,000. Pushing to 60, 7 lowers it to roughly 330, 9,000. That chosen date is simply a portfolio input, not the age Social Security allows, nor the age Medicare defines. Now measure your own position without comparing salaries or houses with anyone.
Add investable assets genuinely earmarked for retirement, workplace plans, ERA, taxable holdings set aside for this purpose, leaving out home equity unless there's a credible way to convert it.
And never double, counting your emergency fund. Divide that total by your relevant coast figure. Below 1, you're under the line. Exactly 1, you've reached it. Above 1, you've cleared it.
A 45-year-old holding 500,000 sits at roughly 1.29, about 29% past the baseline.
But a base case ratio alone isn't the finish line. The assumptions need a stress test.
The fastest route to a falsely comforting number is blending a nominal return with spending priced in today's dollars.
The market averages roughly 10% historically, but that hasn't had inflation removed.
Apply that raw figure to a real target for 20 years and the 45-year rolled number collapses to around 220, 3,000, 160, $5,000 too low.
That's measuring distance in miles and celebrating when the kilometer count shrinks.
Strip roughly 3% of inflation from 10, and you land close to 7, the sturdier assumption, even without a guarantee.
Drop real growth from 7% to 6.5%, and the figure climbs to about 420, 6,000, half a point, adding roughly $38,000.
At 5%, the requirement jumps to around 565,000. The dangerous mistakes hide exactly where two reasonable assumptions overlap.
Standard advice says max the account and wait until 65, but it never tells you when the original job is finished.
That's exactly the gap I built a companion resource around, called the Exit Blueprint. Links in the description if useful.
The withdrawal rate deserves the same scrutiny as the growth rate.
The familiar 4% traces back to mid-90s research on historical returns, expanded by later studies, never a government guarantee, just a historical result tied to specific portfolios.
A recent industry report pegged a more cautious 3.9% starting rate down from 4% a few years earlier, reflecting shifting valuations and yields rather than broken.
Research.
Stack the cautious assumptions together. 6.5% growth with a 3.7% withdrawal rate pushes the 45-year-old threshold to roughly 460,000.
Push further to 5% growth and 3.5% withdrawal, and the figure climbs near 646,000.
That gives you a range, not a single magic number, roughly 388,000 base case, 460,000 cautious, 646,000 stress case.
Which band matters most depends on how flexible the rest of your life actually is. Markets also don't deposit a tidy 7% every December.
During a pure coast stretch, the order of returns doesn't change the ending balance mathematically, but real life rarely stays that clean, which is exactly why this number deserves an annual
check-in rather than a single calculation filed away for 20 years. The word retirement also hides 3 different ages people blend together.
65 is simply the chosen portfolio date.
Social Security runs its own clock, full benefits at 60, 7 for anyone born in 1960 or later, governing a scheduled payment, not your investment strategy.
Medicare eligibility sits at 65, a third boundary entirely on its own.
Fold Social Security into your math only after modeling its actual starting date. A benefit beginning at 60, 7 can't cover expenses at 60. 5 without a 2-year bridge built in first.
This is also why your number can't be judged against a median statistic.
Net worth folds in home equity, vehicles, and debt. Coast status only cares about the investable portion that can actually compound.
The median describes the economy. It says nothing about whether your future spending is funded.
Now the boundary that trips up almost everyone. Crossing this line does not make your present life free.
Rent still arrives, insurance still needs paying, taxes don't pause.
If your paycheck vanished tomorrow, the portfolio was never built to fund 20 extra years of current living. Withdraw early and the calculation resets immediately.
You may still need income. You likely don't need the same income, hours, or stress. That difference is the entire prize.
Removing a required contribution lowers what work has to produce.
A smaller required income can make part-time work realistic, support a career switch with a pay cut, or free a small business from funding both today and a distant retirement simultaneously.
Or you keep contributing anyway, buying an earlier date or a thicker buffer. Stopping was never the prize, choosing was always the prize.
This is exactly where the math collides with human wiring.
For years, one instruction repeats, earn more, save more, never fall behind. Probably right for most of your career. But your brain quietly turned it into identity.
Contributing feels virtuous. Cutting back feels reckless, even after the reason for it has dissolved.
The spreadsheet says 0 deposits are required. Your nervous system still flashes a warning light.
Uncertainty adds another layer. Future returns are unknowable, so another year on the job feels like buying safety, and 1 extra year becomes 3 because certainty never arrives.
Comparison keeps the engine running too, pulling focus towards someone else's visible outcome instead of your own quiet requirement.
Isn't it strange that money alone rarely explains why people keep working?
Research following older adults shows genuine appetite for continued work when jobs offer real flexibility. Yet a recent workforce survey found nearly half of retirees left earlier than planned.
Most often citing health, followed by affordability.
Don't assume you'll get to choose your exit date, and don't assume everyone working past 60. 5 is financially stuck either.
Below your accepted line, contributions still close a real gap. At the line, the modeled requirement can fall to 0.
Above it, saving buys an upgrade, not a necessity worth buying, as long as you name it correctly.
Holding $350,000 at 40, 5 still leaves real work for contributions to do. Holding $450,000 clears the base case but not the cautious line. Holding $500,000 clears both, and every extra dollar now buys margin, an earlier date, or a different lifestyle.
This beats simply asking whether you're financially independent.
Full independence asks whether the portfolio funds your entire life right now. Coast status only asks whether the future piece is already handled.
Pairing Coast Capital with a separate cash runway is often what creates real career freedom. The portfolio protects the years after 65. The runway protects the bridge leading up to it.
Asking one account to do both jobs is how people accidentally spend the money that was supposed to keep compounding.
Think about two people, both 45, both holding $500,000.
One treats that number as a finish line and quietly relaxes every part of their financial life at once. Spending climbs, saving stops, nothing gets reviewed again.
The other treats it as a checkpoint, reduces contributions deliberately, keeps tracking real expenses, and revisits the band every year as markets move.
5 years later, the first person often discovers the number they trusted was built on the cheapest set of assumptions available, while spending had quietly drifted upward at the same time.
The second person simply adjusts the dial because they built a system instead of a single verdict.
The math doesn't punish anyone for stopping. It punishes anyone who stops paying attention. That's really the difference this framework is trying to protect.
Not whether you technically crossed a line on a spreadsheet once, but whether you keep treating your own number as something alive rather than something settled.
A coast figure calculated once and never revisited behaves like a smoke detector with a dead battery. Quiet, reassuring, and completely useless the one time it actually matters.
If a thicker buffer genuinely matters to you, keep contributing. If it's simply fear with no defined upgrade attached, price that extra year in time as carefully as in dollars.
You don't need a dramatic resignation to prove the math worked. Negotiating fewer hours, switching roles, or declining a promotion that would wreck your life all count just as much.
The portfolio never issues commands. It only removes one constraint at a time.
Once the baseline is funded, routing every spare dollar towards 65 can leave you wealthy decades from now while needlessly boxed in today.
The opposite trap is treating this line as permission to inflate spending permanently. If the higher lifestyle follows you into retirement, the target climbs and you may slide back below the line.
Choose the band you can actually defend, not the smallest number a calculator spits out.
Label your assumptions, update your spending figure, and decide in advance what crossing the line changes. Maybe contributions drop instead of stopping entirely. Maybe the difference funds a bridge.
Account. No system currently measures this for you. The industry counts assets accumulated. Employers measure output. Comparison measures visible spending.
None are built to tell you the moment your own portfolio has already bought enough future time.
For a 45-year-old aiming at $60,000 of yearly spending starting at 65, the clean base answer sits near $388,000.
The cautious blend pushes that to roughly $460,000. Cross whichever line you're genuinely willing to trust, and the future contribution requirement becomes 0.
That crossing date was never automatically your retirement date. It's simply your choice date.
Boring, disciplined investing has quietly built more real fortune than almost any speculative trend chasing headlines.
The goal was never leaving work as early as mathematically possible. It was reaching the point where work no longer makes every decision on your behalf.
If this changed how you think about your own account, subscribe to Navira Invests for more research built on real numbers. Thank you for watching.